Most people really miscalibrate technological change quite dramatically, and they often give up on it before they actually should. This is my own belief. I'm just thinking about right now um, the transition of newspapers to digital media. That was a real interesting case when digital newspapers transitioned to the digital environment, and there was a lot of challenges with figuring out how to actually do that so that the newspapers can actually survive. um, some newspapers didn't manage to do very well, right? Driving around my neighborhood, I don't see any newspapers. I see one or two newspapers that are on people's doorsteps. When I was growing up, there was a newspaper on every single doorstep. And this transition was challenging, and there was lots of people that got um, hurt because they were focused on one particular kind of media, and they were afraid to sort of transition to different kinds of media. Now, there has been some newspapers that have done fairly well, and you will notice that today many of the major newspapers actually have a whole host of media that they perform, and they're making the transition a little bit. But even there's pockets of small newspapers around the country that have transitioned and embraced digital media much more fully, right? So they'll do, for example, there is a newspaper in South Carolina that my wife loves to listen to, and they do podcasts, right? And it's a sort of investigative um, journalist that's getting into the Murdoch case and going really deep into it and telling the story about what's going on with this, right? It's like true crime kind of stuff. And newspapers are doing that. Several newspapers are doing that. And it's not necessarily the newspaper themselves, it's a reporter that's doing it. And they're getting quite a bit of success from this, right? Because some of these true crime stories are really bizarre. And people like to listen to that kind of thing. But the problem is there's not a lot of people still doing that, not a lot of newspapers doing that. Um, and what's interesting is that this was when we were going through this transition, the sort of talk style, investigative reporting style. So this is probably back in 2003 through 2007, nobody had even considered doing anything like that. Podcast came out in about 2007. And even then, for many years, podcast adoption has been remarkably slow. A lot slower than I ever thought it would be. And, as one of the initial adopters of podcasts, and it's been remarkably slow to get the sort of masses involved in it. Because I remember it was actually really just nerdy people for a very long time that listened to podcasts. Very nerdy. And so some newspapers have made this transition and have done spectacularly well, right? That they have done very, very well if they've embraced this model. The transition of different individuals to mass media or mass digital media has been profound for some individuals that have really embraced it, but the vast majority of people still recognize it and stigmatize it as this is somehow problematic and we should never pursue that particular thing. It's interesting how we as individuals, we let our morals, we let our values dictate much of our decisions. And these morals and values are often, there often is a good basis behind them. I understand why people don't want to participate on social media um, because it's played in a certain way. However, if you sidestep some of that stuff, right, and you think about the transition in or going through technological change, and you sideswipe some of the morality components of it, and you focus on the story that's your own, You focus on a way to do your own thing, given the technological change that you think is actually, right, and just. That you do lots of stuff, lots of interesting things change at that moment. So for me, right, like if you watch or listen to anything that I talk about, I try not to be, I mean, I try not to be negative, but, or I embrace difficult concepts, but then at the same time, like I really try to help in whatever way that I could possibly can, right? And get you to get back on your feet, um, and get back and get going, right? Rather than in social media, depending on the platform, right? All the different platforms that we have, right? So Facebook is a bunch of angry people, angry family members, basically. LinkedIn is a bunch of bragging. Twitter is just a bunch of angry people yelling at each other. Like these different platforms have different personalities and different styles of what is going on. That was intentional. That was the design of the platform when they were building them. And we have to sort of recognize them and sideswipe some of that, like some of what you're trying to do, and sort of have embrace it in a different way, be like a different person, right? So it's the same thing as these newspaper, um, reporters that you can sort of think about that. Hey, you could just sort of throw up your hands, say technological change is happening. I'm going to lose my job as a journalist, or ChatGPT is coming in. I'm going to lose my job as a writer, or I can figure out a way that I can embrace it and turn it into something that's remarkably me, remarkably what I represent, and is also, beneficial in various different ways, and however that conversation might be. So I want you to sort of think about that rather than being scared of technological change. Think about how you can, um, recognize that it's happening. And yes, it might sort of change how your position stands in this world temporarily. But think about how you can invest in the future so that your position changes in the future. And it might be, this is where it's challenging. I think a lot of people, and this is where newspapers sort of have a challenge with it. They almost have the innovator's dilemma that's going on, where if they stick with the current dying technology, they will, they'll perform temporarily, but then in the future they will be with a dying technology. Or you can switch to something that's vastly inferior, not really doing that much in terms of performance, but then over the long haul, it turns into something that's more important, right? So thinking about making that investment decision, I think, is very important for all of us. And so we should start embracing what that investment decision means, going forward. All right, take care and have a wonderful day.